Welcome to the Pure Passion Podcast with Dr. David Kyle Foster. This podcast and our many other resources are made possible by our donors. Please support this ministry by going to our website, masteringlife.org.
Welcome to Pure Passion. I'm your host, David Kyle Foster. Today we have the author of Trans Life Survivors. One of his best books. He's got how many books, Walt Heyer? Seven books. What are some of the other titles?
Paper Genders, Trans Life Survivors, of course. Kid Dakota and the Secret at Grandma's House. That book was written for kids under 18 years old so they could catch a glimpse of it. Articles of impeachment against sex change surgery and a transgender's faith. And
one of your websites anyway is sexchangeregret.com. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Walter is a trans life survivor, and I would like you to give the Cliff Notes version of your story in the first 5 minutes or so.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my journey starts actually in 1944. I'm 81 years old. I was 4 years old when I started this whole quote, what they call transgender process, which nobody is a transgender, by the way, just to get that clear. Guys put on women's dresses and they become confused about their gender and they call themselves transgender when they haven't changed genders, actually. But it was my grandmother who initiated this by making me a purple chiffon dress when I was 4 years old. She put it on me, told me how cute I was. It was our secret. Hence the book, Kid Dakota and the Secret at Grandma's House. That's why I wrote the book. It talks about grandma dressing me up as a girl and the impact of boys wearing dresses and the impact of somebody affirming a young person in an alternate identity and the harm that it causes. And to give you an idea of how much harm it does cause, I'm 81 years old and I'm still talking about what happened to me when I was 4. So let's not say that something isn't harmful here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a point that people kind of just need to understand. It's lasts you a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so it's emotional and psychological child abuse to put a young boy in a dress or affirm him in a different gender. Let's just call it what it is.
Yeah.
Shouldn't happen, never happened, not intended to happen. Adults tend to do this and ruin kids' lives, and they don't ever look or consider the consequences. But fortunately, or unfortunately, what transpired after that was when my dad found out that I'd been wearing a dress, he began to physically abuse me. And then when my dad's brother, who was an adopted brother, teenage brother, found out I'd been wearing a dress, he started sexually abusing me. So all because of the stinking dress. I got affirmed by grandma, but I got hit with a hardwood floor plank by my dad and sexually abused by my uncle.
Did she always want a daughter? Is that why she did it?
Yeah, nobody knows, we'll never have that answer. The point is, in my view, it doesn't really matter what her motivation was.
Yeah.
What we need to do is understand it causes emotional and psychological harm. Yeah. And in my case, it ended up causing sexual harm. So all of those things before I was 10 years old. And so no wonder I was a little bit confused about who I was or what my identity was or what sexuality was like. I didn't become homosexual as a result of it. I became fearful about getting intimate with anybody, though. It sort of kind of paralyzes you. So, but I did in my teens, still struggling with my identity all the way through school. I did have a girlfriend named Lola Joy Phipps. And you got to say something about that. Who wouldn't want a girlfriend named Lola Joy Phipps? I mean, she was hot. And so it was cool. I got married when I was, in my early 20s, had 2 children. I was an executive for American Honda Motor Company. I'd had a history of working with on the Apollo space missions as an associate design engineer, working in the area of cryogenics. So I had a great career, but I ended up being an alcoholic and a drug addict and a transgender as a result of what happened by my grandmother putting me in a purple dress. My dad hit me with a hardwood floor plank and being sexually abused. So I changed my gender at age 42 And by the time I was 50, after studying psychology at UC Santa Cruz, I had studied enough psychology to realize that people who identify themselves as transgender or some alternate person is because they're suffering from some psychological disorder. They either have a dissociative disorder, or obsessive compulsive, bipolar, schizophrenia, you name it, they're out there. Yeah. And so what I realized was that people really need help, but they don't need to be putting on a dress and given hormones and having body parts cut off. I mean, this is like Frankenstein stuff.
Right.
It's insane. And not only that, no one in the history of mankind has ever changed their gender. It's never even happened.
Yeah.
It can't happen biologically. It can't happen surgically. It can't happen hormonally. You know, the only thing you can actually change, I discovered from studying this, is you can change your, get this, hold it right there, hold persona. That's it. You can change your persona.
So what was the emotional stuff going on in your life that caused you to go in that direction?
Well, the child abuse and physical abuse. You know,
how did that translate into a transgender identity?
Well, you know, there isn't too many options about what you're going to be. You know, for it, you know, I'm in, you know, in the 1950s, there weren't many things going on. But if you begin to understand, a lot of the men that I've worked with, many of them who were sexually abused at a young age, want to rid themselves of their genitalia, not because they want to be a transgender, but that's the only option you have if you do cut them off. If you cut off your genitalia, what you're doing actually is protecting yourself from being sexually abused again. It's a defense mechanism. It's not about changing genders. If I cut my genitals off, nobody will touch me there again. That's how I prevent someone from touching me. Women, in the same way, had a phalloplasty because they were sexually abused in an effort to repel people from wanting to touch them. So that in both cases, people are doing this not because they have some sexual dysfunction or because they're transgender. They do it because they're trying to protect themselves from ever being sexually abused again.
And these operations, they don't really work very well, do they? Describe.
No, the guys that have their penis, quote, removed, don't have their penis removed. They just invert it. You have everything still there. They just turn it inside out. So you still have all your male parts. They just don't look the same. So the idea that men become women is absolutely the biggest medical fraud in my lifetime. It's never happened. And so it's never happened in terms of somebody changing their gender sex. It can't happen.
And the women, the operations for women?
Well, you know, this is a good point. Most of the women never have a phalloplasty. That's why you hear these stories about men having babies. They're women who identify as men. So women don't get bottom surgery. They just almost, there's a few cases, by and large, they don't want to go through that radical surgery. It's really long, arduous, and it doesn't function. They have to use pumps to make it go up, and it's nasty. And so there's nothing fun about this whole thing about cutting body parts off. It's really quite insane.
But they get mastectomies sometimes.
Yeah, they get mastectomies. That's kind of the big deal that they do. And they take male hormones, which, by the way, are really destructive to women. I mean, male hormones do more harm to women than probably anything else. Probably than the sexual abuse they suffered, hormones will cause them more suffering than the sexual abuse they suffered. For men taking female hormones, they can kind of get over that after 2, 3, 4 years. Women never get over the effects of male hormones, testosterone.
Wow. So you ended up getting surgery. Talk about that era in your life and how did that turn out?
Yeah, it was 1983. I had surgery in Trinidad, Colorado by Dr. Biber, who had done, who by the end of his career had done 4,500 of these surgeries at his clinic. And so, with no opposing viewpoints, voices like mine saying, don't do this, the bridge is out, you have no one to talk to. That's why I do what I do today. I want to be the voice for the people when they're thinking about doing this. And I say, don't do it. It's not going to alleviate the deeper issues that you have going on in your life. Let's identify what's going on and deal with them. For me, it was the sexual abuse. And quite honestly, 60 to 70% of the people I work with were sexually abused.
Yeah.
It's commonplace.
Yeah. Yeah. I've interviewed many, and all of them, in my experience, were sexually abused. Same with homosexuals, very high rate of causal sexual abuse.
Absolutely.
Now, you say that 20% of surgical patients initially have regrets that they even did it. And then the suicide rate actually goes up after 10 to 15 years. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, actually, it was a study out of the UK. UK Guardian wrote the report after a huge, one of the largest studies probably conducted in the world, actually. Back in 2004, it was completed. And in the study done at the university it was 2004, July. A Guardian, the headline was, "Sex change surgeries are ineffective, say researchers." So what they found is that they don't help anybody. And in that report, they said in the ones that they found, 20% of the people regretted it. Well, actually, I think the number is considerably higher than that.
Yeah.
If you look at the people, like somebody contacted me about 3 weeks ago, 40 years later, she's detransitioning because she regrets it. So I think if we look at this regret number from a 1 to 5 year rate, you're going to have a certain number. But if you go 5 to 10 years, you're going to have another number that gets higher. Every 5 or 6 years, you're going to have, the number's going to continue to grow. I would say the number is staggering if we really knew all the people are detransitioning. And by the way, a good time to mention this, myself and every single person that I've worked with that has regret or has detransitioned has never, ever been included in any study.
Wow. Wow.
I've never been included. None of the people have ever been. So they have these studies, but they're very selective. They're very narrow. They don't represent actually at all what happens. So, if you look at my website, sexchangeregret.com, I can tell you everybody that contacts me, 100% of them regret it.
That's a great website, by the way. I was just going through it. Now, when I would imagine after getting the surgery, a lot of people probably very quickly would think, well, this didn't change anything. I still feel completely messed up. I don't, obviously I'm not the opposite sex, even though, cosmetically, I'm slightly different. When did your sex change regret kick in after the surgery?
Well, first off, I would say, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak for myself. When you go through this and you start looking at yourself in the mirror, you look like you changed. So what you do is you start to act as if you did. And so you sort of act out this masquerade.
Yeah.
And what you're trying to do is make it work, because you didn't want to lose your family, lose your career, and spend all this money for something that didn't work.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty hard to deal with. So you're trying to make it work. For me, it probably set in about 6 to 7 years after realizing that I was actually selling carpet in Carmel, California, and going from client to client. And I go, this is just insane.
They believed that you were a woman?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they all did. But when I was in the car leaving one of my clients, I went, this is really stupid to be trying to identify as somebody or not. I felt like I was a fraud. I had all this stuff done. And I think then I began to look at how do I get back. And when I started studying at UC Santa Cruz, that's why I was down in that area, and started studying psychology, realizing that people are affected by psychological issues and they stem from being sexually abused. When you're sexually abused, you develop some psychological disordered thinking, and it can be a variety of different things. So if we begin to look at these individuals and try to treat the abuse they suffered and treat them from the trauma, then we're going to be able to help them. But just stuffing them full of hormones and cutting off body parts is only additional abuse.
How did your wife respond to this transition that you made?
Well, that was pretty simple. She divorced me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I went, and then my kids didn't talk to me. And for my daughter, for the 8 years I lived as Laura, my daughter just didn't talk to me. So that's how that went.
But you're remarried now. So what gave your new wife the courage to enter into that whole world of yours?
Well, as you can see, I'm quite handsome and brilliant guy. So how could she resist not going for me? I mean,
really? Yeah.
So, she liked my sense of humor. She liked the fact that when she saw me speaking about my redemption and restoration through Christ, she said that she wanted somebody who's been through all the stuff in their life and have found the Lord, and that's who I want to be with. So that's when she joined. We've been married almost 25 years.
Nice. Let's talk about what's going on in terms of children getting harmed. Describe what's going on starting at the earliest ages and each step along the way, and then the consequences.
Yeah, well, hormone blockers, we know are really destructive. They were never intended to be put into children who are struggling with their gender identity. Hormone blockers were designed and developed for children whose puberty was accelerating at a faster rate. In other words, maybe a 7-year-old had the puberty of a 12-year-old. And so the doctor then would use the blockers to slow down the development. It was never intended to be used for kids who identified as transgender. And so the harmful effects are numerous. I could go into several of them, but from brain disorders to growth issues to sterilization. And then when the kids come off of them, they'll have psychological issues, emotional issues that need to be dealt with. Then if the parents move them on to hormones after the blockers, then we know the harm done by hormones is horrible. And many of the kids that I work with today contact me a year after going through this and say, can you help me detransition?
Gosh.
People only identify as a transgender oftentimes for a short period of time. And they go, this is nonsense.
Mm-hmm. And then they get cross-sex hormones, are they called? And that makes them sterile, right?
Makes them sterile. But here's the thing. What we need to understand is that both female and male cross-sex hormones are anabolic steroids. And then if we look up anabolic steroids, they're very addictive. And that's why the clinics use them. They get the kids addicted. These are like drug clinics, getting kids addicted on these anabolic steroids. They're dangerous, they're powerful, and very addictive. So when you get a kid hooked on them, and they take them for the rest of their life after you have the surgery. You need this. So the pharmaceutical companies are just making a boatload of money off of this.
Are there any medical experts who have changed their view on this and are now speaking against transgender?
Oh, yeah.
There's a famous one from Johns Hopkins University who actually started the sex change.
My friend, Dr. McHugh.
Yeah.
He and I have lunch together. We're buddies. We're on speed dial.
Why did he change his mind?
Well, because he studied it and he said, by affirming somebody in a cross-gender identity, all we're doing is collaborating with their mental disorder.
Oh, wow. That's so right. Yeah. And he shut the program down as a result.
He shut the program down.
Yeah.
In fact, they shut him down all around the country after he did that. And the only one that opened up a clinic was the guy who did surgery on me.
Gosh. So, and then they've reopened the program ever since with some other leader, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so. So there are experts who are now speaking against this. I suppose their careers are getting destroyed by the trans activists.
They try. In some cases, they're successful. In some cases, they're not. But there's a lot of endocrinologists and doctors today that are working quietly and doing a good job of helping people that are struggling with these issues, helping families deal with it. And unfortunately, they do have to stay kind of out of the limelight.
What does the legal system do in this area?
Well, Alliance Defending Freedom has done quite a bit of work in this area, and currently working right now myself. I've been working with Alliance Defending Freedom for 5 years.
Good.
And we're working on a case with a young man who in California, who was under the care of a medical facility there for over 5 years, from 2013 to 2021, because he was suffering from schizophrenia, bipolar 1 disorder, PTSD, because he was sexually abused by his brother and physically abused by his dad. And in March of this year, 2021, they transitioned him, cut off his genitals, and did facial surgery, did a bunch of things to him, told him he was transgender. He contacted me in August and he said, man, they never should have done that to me. We have a legal case now that will be filed in March for medical malpractice. It'll become a national case. It's probably the most clear example of how rogue this whole thing is and how much harm is done, because this guy is a heterosexual man who wants to have a family, but he doesn't have the jewels to do it with now because they cut him off.
Yeah. So if somebody's had these feelings, and they've got to be pretty powerful to go to the length of surgery, let's say they start into counseling with somebody who's helping them get out of the lifestyle, or maybe they get saved by God, and then you have the supernatural power helping you. How are these powerful feelings reversed? What does that process look like?
Yeah, well, the way you reverse this is, it's not about the powerful feelings. It's about a good therapist identifying the comorbid disorder that's causing them to want to not be who they are. Because if you look at the whole transgender process, it's self-destructive behavior. You have to destroy your name. You have to destroy what you look like. You destroy everything about you. So if you look at this through the lens of self-destructive behavior, then you start to treat their self-destruction. And that's why under these issues, we have people who have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. And many of these things are very tragic. And if they get the proper treatment, then the strong feelings, as you put it, just go away because they're getting the treatment they need. But if you just fill them with hormones and cut body parts off, all you do is temporarily help them sort of go through this process and live this alternate life. But the feelings will come back because they never treated the underlying comorbidity in the first place.
Yeah, I would imagine self-hatred is often present, and shame. And
oh, sure.
Yeah. Especially if they've been sexually abused, they're going to have those things, and a need to be in control. Perhaps that's part of it too.
Absolutely. You know, if the only way you can take control of your life is cut off body parts, then we need to have a conversation about why you've got to that point, because it's a horrible way to take control of your life. Self-destruction.
Now, in your experience, when you went through therapy, what did the therapist address, and how was it transformed?
Yeah, that was really interesting. I went to a Christian therapist for many years, and he sat there and let me talk. And he never said a word the entire time.
Well,
that was they would call that conversion therapy.
Okay.
You know, all he did was listen to me, and I just regurgitated all this stuff. And he says, okay, you're coming back next week, you know, so there was really no magic to it. I happened to be redeemed and restored through prayer. And Jesus Christ came to me and redeemed my life. It's in my book, A Transgender's Faith. You can see how the Lord came to me and redeemed my life.
What are some of the specifics of that? What exactly did he put his finger on, and what kind of enablement did he give you to walk out of it?
Yeah, well, I was working with a psychologist at the time, and I went through, if anybody's listening that knows the 4th step of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's where you write down all your things and you talk to somebody about it. And I had 21 pages of things that I was resentful over, the pain that I'd gone through. And we spent 3.5 hours, the psychologists I did, going through these things and then asking the Lord to take them. When we were done with this, we went outside, lit the paper on fire with all this stuff on there, went back in and prayed. And during that prayer, the Lord actually came to me. I could see the Lord. He came to me with his arms out, and he says, he put his arms around me as a little baby. I was sitting in front of me. I could see a little baby. He picked that baby up, which I could see was me. And he held that baby and he says, "You are now safe with me forever." That was the day in that prayer that he came to redeem my life. And my life was transformed in that moment. But I had to deal with every issue that I had with a psychologist and go through it step by step and turn it over to the Lord so that I wasn't hanging on to it. I didn't give the Lord part of my life. I gave him all my life.
Yeah. And that's really necessary, isn't it? You've got to come to the place where you're willing to do whatever it takes to get healed. Now, if you're like me, I had been in homosexuality and prostitution and sex addiction. The Lord has continued beyond that initial healing phase. He continues to show me things and give me impartations of his love and things like that. What are some of those things that have happened since your primary healing sessions that God has done?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. As I told before, I wasn't a homosexual. In fact, when I lived as identified as Laura, I had no contact with anybody. I lived a life that was just alone. That was just how I lived. Many of the people I work with don't ever engage in any kind of relationships when they're identifying as trans. It's not about sexuality. It's about their identity. So, what's come out of this is the work that I do in helping other people. My website, Sex Change Regret, that is probably the greatest gift that I've had. And I travel with my wife around the world. We probably we've estimated pretty clearly, we reach about 200 million people a year with our ministry work. And, I've been on documentary films. One of them you might know about is called Transformed. I don't know if you ever watched it, but I've done about 15 documentary films. I've done a lot of work in Russia because Putin is very much against this whole transgender thing because he said it's ruining families there. And so Putin has specifically had me on their #1 channel in Russia. Russia, Putin's a dangerous man in many ways, but we need to understand something, that Putin is a very family-oriented guy, and he wants Russian families to be whole and to propagate, kind of unlike they do here in the U.S., unfortunately. Yeah. So I've done more documentary films in Russia than any other place in the world.
Gosh. Well, I'm glad you brought up Transform. That's a documentary film that we did a few years ago. It's called Transformed with a Z, Finding Peace with Your God-Given Gender. And Walt was one of the guests. We've also done 2 interviews with Walt on our previous TV show. And you can find those on our website, masteringlife.org, or you can go to our YouTube page, and the ending of that is David Kyle Foster, and actually watch them. You can also get the film, which I think is our best film ever. You can get that for free on the YouTube page, or you can buy it on DVD from our website. Now, we're out of time.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry, because this is a fascinating subject and you're an outstanding guest.
Well, thank you.
Tell us again what your books are and how to contact you.
Well, the primary books that people should get are Paper Genders and Trans Life Survivors. You can look at the website, go to the bookstore, you'll get the rest of the books. You can contact me through my website at sexchangeregret.com. Anybody that has questions or wants me to answer. But I'll tell you what, if you read Paper Genders and Trans Life Survivors, you will be transformed by what you read.
And I imagine if the transgender people who are watching this or listening to this, some of them are really mad right now. But I really urge you to go to Walt's site, because it's filled with the science and the logic and the reason. It's really, really good. And you owe it to yourself to look at that stuff because you want to live out of reality. And the transgender life is not reality. It's a coping mechanism that is dysfunctional and ultimately destructive. So, Walt, I'm so glad that you came on the program. God bless you.
Thank you. You know, those people that may not like me, you gotta need to know I'm a lovable little fuzzball.
He is. I've had dinner with him.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. All right, bye.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Remember, much of Dr. Foster's teaching has been taken from his new book entitled Sexual Healing Reference Edition, available at our website, masteringlife.org. This podcast and our many other resources are available because of our donors. If you are one of them, thank you. If you would like to join in supporting us, please visit masteringlife.org.